Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Microsoft announces deprecation of Windows Server update services. Also, hot patching for Windows Server finally reaches preview. And OpenAI CEO Sam Altman predicts major breakthrough in AI superintelligence is imminent. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Microsoft has announced the deprecation of Windows Server Update Services, also lovingly known as WSUS. They said while there will be no investment into new capabilities, they will be preserving current functionality and will continue to publish updates through the WSUS channel. They say they will also support any content already published through the WSUS channel. WSUS deprecation does not impact existing capabilities or support for Configuration Manager. And while the WSUS role remains available in Windows Server 2025, Microsoft does recommend that organizations transition to cloud tools, including Windows Auto Patch and Microsoft Intune for client update management and Azure Update Manager for server update management. This is interesting because, they're deprecating a service or a feature that is available in the latest version of Windows Server 2025. And I know when it came to AppV, the saying that the client is in there as a feature would mean that they're going to support it for another 10 years. But really, it seems now the line that they might be taking is, it might be included in the OS, but it's going to be in a deprecated state. So don't expect development and maybe don't even expect much support. So if you're still using WSUS, it seems like you're going to have to go to one of the larger, more encompassing products for managing your Windows updates. The hot patching feature for Windows Server that Microsoft announced quite some time ago, and which I covered on multiple episodes of this podcast, is now available in public preview. Hot patching enables you to install Windows updates on your Server 2025 machines without requiring a reboot to complete patching. Not only will it mean servers may only need a reboot once a quarter for patching purposes, it also means reduced resource usage, lower workload impact, and more. Obviously, this would be a huge benefit because one of the most intrusive processes and complicated processes to manage in enterprise IT are those pesky reboots. So this would be a very welcome feature. Google has reportedly filed a complaint to the European Commission on Wednesday against what it said was Microsoft's anti-competitive practices to lock customers into Microsoft's cloud platform, Azure. Google Cloud Vice President Amit Zavery told a briefing that Microsoft made customers pay a 400% markup to keep running Windows Server on rival cloud computing operators, and this did not apply if they used Azure. Users of rival cloud systems would also get later and more limited security updates. Google pointed to a 2023 study by cloud services organization CISPE, which found that European businesses and public sector bodies were paying up to €1 billion per year on Microsoft licensing penalties. Reuters.com reported that Google said that only regulatory action would end Microsoft's vendor lock and level the playing field for competitors. I know everyone in the industry would likely, already probably think that Microsoft does have that competitive advantage. It's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out in the future because just by the nature of Microsoft and how reliant enterprises are on Microsoft, many of the services they're offering and the way they sell products seems pretty difficult from a regulatory perspective. I know Microsoft already came to an agreement on some anti-competition claims against it, and they did waiver and strike a partnership around Office for AWS. So it's likely that they're going to have to find some way to appease these competitors and to maybe level the playing field themselves or risk major penalties. Also, regulation related, an EU privacy group called NOIB has accused Mozilla of a GDPR violation by tracking Firefox users by default without their permission via a new privacy preserving attribution feature that Mozilla recently deployed in Firefox that it argues turns the Firefox browser into, quote, a tracking tool for websites, end quote. The claimants suggest, quote, contrary to its reassuring name, this technology allows Firefox to track user behavior on websites. In essence, the browser is now controlling the tracking rather than individual websites. While this might be an improvement compared to even more invasive cookie tracking, the company never asked its users if they wanted to enable it. Instead, Mozilla decided to turn it on by default once people installed a recent software update. This is particularly worrying because Mozilla generally has a reputation for being a privacy-friendly alternative when most other browsers are based on Google's Chromium, end quote. It seems Mozilla moved to put a good foot forward and at least appear diplomatic, stating that they welcome opportunities to engage with stakeholders, its own community of users, and regulators as it builds out the technology. TechCrunch.com's article speculates some of the motive behind this may be their dependence on revenue from Google, which is something I covered on the podcast recently, as the default search engine in Firefox is Google, and Google pays Mozilla a considerable sum of money for this privilege. So yeah, it is certainly interesting, and just like that NOIB group said, Mozilla is seen as a more kind of friendly alternative and a more data secure alternative to Google. And this seems like a step in the wrong direction for Firefox if they want to keep those people who want an alternative to what Google Chrome and those Chromium browsers offer. Microsoft OneDrive support is now available for RemoteApp in Azure Virtual Desktop. So previously, OneDrive could only be used on AVD with non-persistent desktops and was not supported on RemoteApp. With this new support, you can now use OneDrive alongside a RemoteApp in Azure Virtual Desktop, which allows users to access and synchronize their files while using a RemoteApp. When a user connects to a RemoteApp, OneDrive can automatically launch as a companion to RemoteApp. The new support has the same features and usability as the OneDrive on your personal device. OneDrive support for Azure Virtual Desktop RemoteApp is currently fully supported with Windows 11 version 23H2, and the Windows Insider is still in preview. Last week, Kaspersky deleted its anti-malware software from customers' computers across the US and automatically replaced it with Ultra AV's antivirus solution instead. This comes after Kaspersky decided to shut down its US operations and lay off US-based employees in response to the US government adding them to an entity list or a catalog of foreign individuals, companies, and organizations deemed a national security concern. In early September, Kaspersky emailed customers assuring them they would continue receiving reliable cybersecurity protection from Ultra AV after Kaspersky stopped selling software and updates for US customers. However, those emails failed to inform users that Kaspersky's products would be abruptly deleted from their computers and replaced with Ultra AV without warning, according to a report by BleepBootComputer.com. Ultra AV software was installed on people's computers without any prior notification, with many concerned that their devices had been infected with malware. It appears the move was defended, with the company stating, quote, "This update ensured that users would not experience a gap in protection upon Kaspersky's exit from the market," end quote. The company states that Ultra AV has a similar feature set to its products and asks customers to review an FAQ page on Ultra AV's website or contact its support team for more information. I suppose it's a moot point since they've exited the market, but would you trust an antivirus vendor who goes and removes their product and then installs someone else's product onto your machine? Even if it's not malware, that's kind of malware. It's something you didn't ask for. Users of macOS 15 or Sequoia are reporting network connection errors when using CrowdStrike Falcon, Sentinel-1, or ESET endpoint security amongst security products, and also some VPN solutions and web browsers too. The issues are resolved when these tools are deactivated, indicative of incompatibility issues with the network stack. Users on Reddit reported SSL failures in the web browsers or an inability to use wget and curl. BleepComputer.com reported that vendors such as CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, and more have advised their customers not to upgrade to macOS 15 because of changes in the operating system's networking structures. People have also reported intermittent connectivity issues with Mullvad VPN and also corporate VPN products they use for remote work, though Proton VPN is reportedly working fine with the latest version. While Apple has not responded to these reports, BleepyComputer.com has found that the macOS 15 release notes show that a feature in the operating system's firewall has been deprecated, which may be causing the issues. ESET has taken the step to issue an advisory for those facing connection losses after upgrading to macOS Sequoia, suggesting that users should navigate to System Settings, Network, Filters, and remove ESET Network from that list. After restarting the system, the network connection should be functional with the ESET product running normally. Ivanti has warned that there are active exploits of another vulnerability in their cloud services appliance. Tracked as CVE-2024-8963, this admin bypass vulnerability is caused by a path traversal weakness. Successful exploitation allows remote, unauthenticated attackers to access restricted functionality on vulnerable CSA systems. Attackers are using exploits that chain CVE-2024-8190 with this vulnerability that I just listed, and it's a high-severity CSA command injection bug that was fixed previously. That vulnerability was used to bypass admin authentication and execute arbitrary commands on unpatched appliances. Obviously, patch as soon as possible for this new vulnerability and make sure you've patched that previously patched vulnerability too. But they also suggest in the BleepyComputer.com report to review alerts, and if you suspect compromise, follow Ivanti's recommendation that you rebuild your CSA with patch 519. Thanks to Carl Stallhood for sharing this next story on Twitter. Microsoft has addressed a known issue with FSLogix where local cache and temp state folders are not properly cleaned up during sign-out. Users reported seeing issues when migrating to Microsoft Teams from Classic Teams, and the Teams icon was missing from the start menu, which can occur due to a stale cache in the local app data /packages/microsoft.windows.start menu experience host _ a bunch of gibberish /temp state directory. The current workaround is to create or update the redirections.xml to exclude this temp state folder. They're working on a permanent fix. Microsoft has announced that the new VDI solution for Teams on Azure Virtual Desktops and Windows 365 environments is now generally available. This is something I already covered on a previous episode of the podcast, so I won't labor the point again, but it will provide improved performance of Teams on these desktop types, and they are doing some cool things around managing updates via the Teams MSIX package. Microsoft MVP James Robinson recently tweeted that he noticed there's a new UAC setting. It's called Administrator Protection, and listed on Microsoft's own knowledge base. They say this policy setting controls the behavior of the elevation prompt for administrators, and you could choose prompt for credentials on the secure desktop. And when an operation requires elevation or privilege, the user is prompted on the secure desktop to enter privileged credentials. If the user enters valid credentials, the operation continues with the user's highest available privilege. And the other option is prompt for consent on the secure desktop. When an operation requires elevation or privilege, the user is prompted on the secure desktop to select either allow changes or don't allow. And if the user selects allow changes, the operation continues with the user's highest available privileges. So it seems like one has an extra step or maybe perhaps an extra layer of security. So I guess that's good, maybe. But it's also going to be more inconvenient. But to be fair, I think this is already the behavior that you see within the Windows OS. Google has announced that Passkeys added to Google Password Manager will now automatically sync between Windows, macOS, Linux, Android, and Chrome OS devices for logged in users. BleepyComputer.com suggested that previously passkeys could only be saved to Google Password Manager on Android, and you could only access them on other devices by scanning a QR code using your Android device. So this is going to be much more convenient and is another example of a company embracing passkeys for added security. Yet another report by BleepyComputer.com, who I'm featuring a lot this week. But the Walt Disney Company is reportedly ditching Slack after a July data breach exposed over 1 terabyte of confidential messages and files posted to the company's internal communication channels. The threat actor claimed to steal all messages and files from almost 10,000 Slack channels containing upcoming project details, financial information, information technology information, and other confidential information. Disney suffered another breach a month earlier when 2.5 gigs of Club Penguin and corporate data was leaked from the company's Confluence server on the 4chan message board. In the report, there's no confirmation what platform Disney will be moving to, whether that's going to be Teams or perhaps they'll build their own internal communication channel. Ars Technica has reported that a representative from Google recently proposed ending the reliance on WHOIS data for domain ownership verification. This comes in light of recent events where research from Watchtower Labs demonstrated how threat actors could exploit WHOIS to obtain fraudulently issued TLS certificates. A formal proposal calls for reliance on WHOIS data to sunset in early November. It establishes specifically that CAs must not rely on WHOIS to identify domain context, and that effective from November 1st, 2024, validations using this method must not rely on WHOIS to identify domain contact information. And those validations are using email verification specifically. Others have questioned the need for a change as proposed, though, given that the security failure Watchtower uncovered is known to affect only a single top-level domain. An Amazon representative, meanwhile, noted that the company previously implemented a unilateral change in which the AWS Certificate Manager will fully transition away from reliance on WHOIS records. The representative told CAB forum members that Google's proposed deadline of November 1st may be too stringent. And on that remark about the November 1st deadline being too stringent, DigiCert endorsed Amazon's proposal to extend that deadline. DigiCert also went on to propose that instead of using WHOIS records, CAs instead use the WHOIS successor known as the Registration Data Access Protocol. The proposed changes are formally in the discussion phase of deliberations, and it's unclear when formal voting on the change will begin. But certainly, when it hasn't even been voted on yet by all of these stakeholders, it seems very ballsy to put a November 1st deadline on it, considering that's only a few weeks away. At AVD Tech Fest this week, ControlUp and Nerdio announced an enhanced go-to-market partnership where customers will be able to bundle licenses for the products and receive up to 40% of a discount off each. ControlUp also alluded to some features around monitoring and metrics for Windows 365 that should be coming soon, but there wasn't a whole lot of detail around that part. Winamp is now open source and there to grab on GitHub for all, and they asked for assistance modernizing the player. So if you fancy an opportunity to contribute to one of the most beloved media players of all time, now is your chance. In a follow-up story to last week's news about Amazon forcing employees back to the office 5 days a week starting next year, a survey of 2,585 verified Amazon employees by Blind showed 91% are dissatisfied with the move to return to the office. And according to Ars Technica, 80% of workers said that they know someone at Amazon who's considering job hunting due to the policy. Interestingly, 32% of employees reported that they already know someone who quit in response to the impending 5-day in-office work week. There has been much said on social media too from alleged employees who are trying to advocate for a reversal on the decision. WindowsCentral.com reported that ChatGPT 4 consumes up to 3 bottles of water to generate just 100 words. This news is according to new research by the University of California, first spotted by the Washington Post, and then followed through by Windows Central, who also reported last year suggesting that the then current models of Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT consumed up to 1 bottle of water per query for cooling, raising concerns about local water supplies due to this demand on the AI services. And obviously, ChatGPT 4 is more advanced than the models that were out last year. The amount of water consumed differed based on state in the report, however, with Texas reporting the lowest water usage, estimated at 235 milliliters per every 100 words. On the other hand, Washington consumed the largest amount of water, translating to 1,408 milliliters for every 100 AI-generated words. In a recent blog post, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman stated, quote, "It is possible that we will have superintelligence in a few thousand days. It may take longer, but I'm confident we'll get there," end quote. Just covering AI for the last couple of years or however long it's been now since it's become like mainstream, the terms around AI seems to get skewed. I personally would think superintelligence is a form of AI that can operate independently, but Altman's post suggests this advanced AI can be used to provide a personal AI team full of virtual experts in different areas working together to create almost anything that we can imagine, stating, "Our children will have virtual tutors who can provide personalized instruction in any subject in any language and at whatever pace they need. We can imagine similar ideas for better healthcare, the ability to create any kind of software someone can imagine, and much more." In his blog post, he said, "With these new abilities, we can have shared prosperity to a degree that seems unimaginable today. In the future, everyone's lives can be better than anyone's life is now. Prosperity alone doesn't necessarily make people happy. There are plenty of miserable rich people, but it would meaningfully improve the lives of people around the world." So that's just an excerpt of the blog post. It seems a little confusing around the superintelligence part because it seems like the AI still would require a lot of input and instruction based off of what he's describing, which I wouldn't think would necessarily be superintelligence. But that stuff about it improving everyone's lives, I don't know, I'm pretty skeptical. Automation has not necessarily improved people's lives to this point in ways that were speculated many years ago. I am not hopeful that this is going to improve people's lives in the positive way that he seems to think. And of course, you have to take what he says with a grain of salt because he owns OpenAI. Of course, he's going to be advocating for AI in such ways. And also, worryingly, more executives have left OpenAI recently, with their CTO just this week resigning. It certainly seems like not all that glitters is gold when it comes to OpenAI or just a lot of these AI product offerings in general, in my opinion. Finally, in the news for this week, and it's actually old news at this point, I think this article is 3 weeks old from the Wall Street Journal, but the unemployment rate for IT workers in the US rose to 6% in August, which is up from 5.6% the prior month, as the boom in AI continued to drastically alter the tech landscape. So yeah, just like having conversations at AVD Tech Fest, it seems like the tech market right now is definitely challenging, and it's something that I've covered on the podcast over the last couple of years too. So for anyone who listens to this podcast and works in enterprise IT, which I'd imagine is most people, I'm wishing the best to everyone. And on that somber note, let's get into this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. The awesome team at GO-EUC recently published a study on single-user AVD in Windows 365, showing some of the performance and cost considerations. I won't give away the results because I don't want to take clicks and views away from the lads, but I would suggest you check out the study for yourself, and I'll share a link to that with this episode, which I do with everything that I cover on every episode of the podcast, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com with this episode, which is episode 353. Also recently published was the DaaS Like a Pro survey results for 2024-2025. Finally, I saw that the AppManagEvent that's going to be held in Utrecht, Netherlands in October issued a last call on tickets. So if you'd like to attend the AppManagEvent, which I highly suggest you do, I've gone to multiple events they've put on in the past, and it's a great event to go to. Now is the last opportunity to go get those tickets. Well, that's it for this episode this week. Apologies if the audio is a little bit off. It's not my recording equipment. I was very sick this week, unfortunately. Just as I was traveling to the Netherlands for AVD Tech Fest, I became sick. So I've just been powering through. And hopefully I'm going to sound a bit better next week. But thanks for listening.